Hey there folks, in here, out there, and everywhere. I am Jeff, your tabletop technician here in the Dice Tower, and today I want to talk just a little bit about Beyond the Sun. Designed by Dennis Chan and produced by Rio Grande Games, Beyond the Sun is essentially a worker placement game that explores the concept of technology trees and also includes an element of area control. Now, I was very excited to play Beyond the Sun at the 2021 Dice Tower Retreat, and I did, and I didn't really quite enjoy it. Now, to be honest, there was a particular element that soured the experience, perhaps more on that than a little bit, but the biggest surprise to me was in fact the area control element of the game. You see, every review I had seen of the game seemed to focus purely upon the tech trees.
Tech trees.
Tech tree. Tech tree.
Tech tree.
A large tech tree. Tech tree. Tech tree, the game.
And I mean, maybe I just wasn't paying attention. Maybe I was just a little too excited at the idea of another space game. But suffice to say, when I first sat down to this, I wasn't really expecting area control, and I'm not really a huge fan of area control. Now, the other thing that I think is a bit misleading about Beyond the Sun is that its tech trees don't really function as tech trees. The idea of a tech tree is that a particular technology is improved the more it's researched. But in Beyond the Sun, since new technologies are revealed randomly as they're discovered, this Tech 3 card might not really have anything to do with this Tech 1 card, and anything that you may have gained or learned across these earlier cards doesn't really have any carryover effect to the later cards. These things typically just add new actions, and sure, they may share a similar theme with the earlier actions based on the category of that technology, but I've never really felt a true progression throughout this game. And as such, I kind of just walked away from Beyond the Sun. I didn't add it to my collection of space-themed games, but I kept seeing it. I mean, heck, our local gaming store has had 2 copies of this on the Ding and Dent shelf for nearly a year, but I just kept telling myself to leave them there. But then news arrived from a distant galaxy of a new expansion. And here it is, Beyond the Sun, Leaders of the New Dawn. Okay, let's be honest, that's not perhaps the most creative name for an expansion. I mean, maybe they could have gone with Eclipse of the Arnak, but whatever. Let's see what's in this box. That doesn't look like very much. First up, there are some new technology, event, and planetary system cards that simply add into the base game. You've got Schultz's Star, Gliese 1, self-replicating refineries, theme park colonies, some new things, sure, why not? There are just 2 new faction boards. Alright, who wants to play with the new faction boards? Oh, no, sorry, only 2 of you can. There are also 4 cards which replace cards from the base game, so then us nerds get to do that little fun thing where we hold on to the old cards in a little bag somewhere, you know, just in case. And then there are new leader cards along with some related components. This really is the heart of this expansion, these 20 cards along with some extra components that you might use depending on which leaders you choose. At the beginning of the game, you'll lay out 2 cards more than the number of players for each of the 2 factions included in this expansion, domestic and military. Players will then snake draft these cards, meaning from last player to first, each player will take a card, and then from first player to last, each player will take a second card, and they must take 1 card from each deck. These leaders add very unique abilities for the player who controls them. Domestic leaders will give unique ways to collect resources, additional means to improve your production, or could just add some extra endgame points. Military leaders might give you clever new ways to deploy new ships, your own private system to colonize, or just provide some extra endgame points. These can be really nice to play with, and they further enhance that variability of the base game. With the different combos of event cards, technology cards, the system boards, the faction boards, and now these new leaders, you can probably play this game 1,000 times and never quite get the same experience twice. I will say though that some of these do seem a bit more powerful than others. When you have the ability to deploy a new ship anywhere where you already have a ship and you can use that constantly throughout the game, while another player simply picks up 2 points at game end, I'm not really sure that these are equally equal. I will also say that it's a bit odd that they've lumped these into just 2 categories of card, despite there being 4 different categories of technology in the game. But adding 4 types of leaders could have added too much bloat. And that's really all that's in here. I mean, except for the new solo expansion, but I wasn't really going to go getting into all of that. On second thought, maybe we will talk about that.
There you go, Jeff. Now you're talking.
These are the components of the solo mode to Beyond the Sun. Oh, no, wait, sorry, let me just clear all this out of the way. You see, you don't actually get to use any of the new expansion content in the solo mode. No faction abilities, no leaders. You'll also leave the event cards from the base game in the box, instead using these Anarchist event cards. That's right, your virtual opponent in the solo mode is referred to as the Anarchist, and you'll understand why by the time we're done. But for now, let's finish setup. The Anarchist gets a Doomsday Tracker filled in with discs from an unused player color. You'll then take the Anarchist action cards, which come in 3 separate levels. The level 2 and 3 cards get placed randomly, face down in the appropriate column of text spaces on the main board, slightly offset. You'll then place the Anarchist event cards also in a random order on the appropriate spaces, like so. Now you will need the supply cubes for the Anarchist, but no mat or action pawn. And you also don't use achievements in the solo game. You also don't get the unique setup bonuses of the faction that you choose. You literally are just picking a mat to get yourself through the game. Now the Anarchist always starts off the game first, and on its turn it will reveal the top card of its action deck, which at the beginning of the game will always be the same 4 level 1 cards. Each card contains a number of rows of actions, and you'll resolve each row from top to bottom, doing the first possible action of each row. Some rows may show multiple actions separated by an arrow. Now, I don't know about you, but an arrow to me typically means... And in this instance, you are likely to assume that you would perform the action before the arrow and then progress to the next action. But that's not what these mean. Instead, these mean that if you can't perform any part of the first action, you then proceed to attempt the second action and so on until you can perform at least some part of any one action in the row. So here, you'd attempt to colonize a system for the Anarchist, and if you can't, then you'd attempt to perform 2 jumps. If you perform at least 1 jump, you've satisfied that row and can move on to the next row. Now this is a common method for triggering actions in a solo game, but it is not common iconography, and it can be a little bit confusing even after multiple plays. But anyways, let's move on. Actions like these will allow the Anarchist to research new technologies. Now there's something of a flowchart in here to determine how the Anarchist will research new tech, and I'm not going to go into all of it now, but just know that the Anarchist will prioritize researching undiscovered technology, and just like in the competitive game, when a new technology is discovered, whether by you or the Anarchist, the first thing that you'll do is flip over the action card in that space. These event cards show 2 results, one that triggers if you discover it first, one that triggers if the Anarchist gets there first. Now, if you triggered the event, you might get an extra resource, maybe get to move a ship over here on the system board. But if the AI discovers it first, you might have to lose a resource, or even go a turn without production. These can get pretty nasty pretty quick. Now, regardless of whoever discovered the technology, when the AI researches a new technology, it will take the action card that you place there on setup and place it face up on its action deck. This gives you 1 turn to sort of prepare for anything that it's going to do next. The higher level action cards, of course, let the AI do more powerful actions, and one action that it will start to do fairly frequently is create Doom. Increasing Doom simply means removing the leftmost marker from the Doomsday track. These tokens also get removed when the Anarchist takes control of a system, and another token is added to the system card when that system is colonized by the Anarchist. The rightmost uncovered space on the Doomsday track also tells you which system the Anarchist will move towards whenever it is to jump any number of ships. And that's basically the solo game. You're racing the Anarchist to discover new tech before it does to avoid the consequences, while it will often take several fairly powerful actions in a single turn and hoovers up planets from the system board. The game ends immediately when the last token is removed from the Doomsday track. The game can also end if one of 3 endgame conditions are met, which very conveniently are only printed here in the middle of the rulebook, so you'll have to of course keep referring back to it when you forget. Now at the end of the game, scoring works the same for technologies as it does in the base game, but the AI will only score 5 points for each system it colonized regardless of what the card says. There is some additional unique endgame scoring for the solo game, which again is only printed in the rulebook. The last thing you do is subtract the Anarchist score from your own and refer to this chart in the rulebook to see how well you did overall. Now, if you've ever seen any of my solo game reviews, you'll know that there are 3 criteria that I like to use when critiquing a solo game. The first of which is setup. I don't like very complex setup for a solo game, especially if you have to remove any cards from large decks because they don't work in solo play. There's only a very little bit of that here in Beyond the Sun, with just 4 cards that have to get removed from 3 decks, and none of the decks of cards in this game are very substantial. Up next is the action management for your AI opponent. Now, I already mentioned my gripe with the iconography here, but other than that, the action management for the anarchist is pretty straightforward. The only thing that I've had a slight problem with is that process for discovering new technology. Somewhere between placing the population cube, resolving the event card, adding the action card to the action deck, and then placing the new technology card, I always tend to leave out one of those steps. And occasionally I'll notice that I have a revealed technology card with no cube on it and an action card still tucked underneath, and I can't quite remember who discovered that tech. Now granted, that's a me thing, but that is a lengthy action to resolve, and it's a little tougher when you don't have a couple extra players sitting around the table to help keep you on the straight and narrow. Anyways, the last thing I like to talk about is whether or not the experience for you, the solo player, remains faithful to the multiplayer experience, and for Beyond the Sun, I have a lot of complaints. For starters, leaving out items like the achievements, the faction powers, and even the new leaders robs the experience of the variety that made this game so appealing in the first place. And as I already kind of mentioned, this whole idea of being punished when the AI discovers new tech before you do will obviously incentivize you to push for these technologies, and as a result kind of abandon the system board, which can be a bit unfortunate since the AI will often get to research tech and build ships and move them and possibly even colonize on the same turn thanks to cards like these, which tell you to reveal and resolve another action card on the same turn. And in the end, the solo mode of this game does something that I've rarely seen. It turns a relatively casual, almost Euro-like game into a frustrating, punishing, and stressful experience. I felt real anxiety while playing this game, and I haven't felt that since the first time I played it when we had someone at the table who would voluntarily move other players' pieces because they themselves were a little impatient. Don't do that. And that's a little ironic because that's kind of what the solo mode does. It takes your stuff, it manipulates your things, and since you are playing it by yourself, it's almost like the game is saying, here, take this stick and beat yourself over the head with it. Now, I will say that my multiplayer opinions of the game have improved significantly since that first play. I can say that I do like Beyond the Sun, but for the expansion, you can either get a very stressful solo experience, or you can add a couple bits to your base game for the MSRP of $39.95. Not sure what to do? Well, here, let me help. Now, how'd that feel? Cheers.
All right, Jeff, I'm just setting up this invoice for services rendered. Where do you want me to send this?